When you think about miracles, what comes to mind? Probably something from way, way back, right? Like biblical times. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? Today, we're jumping into a fascinating text that argues the age of miracles never actually stopped. So here's the common thinking, right? The whole miracle thing, the signs, the wonders, the incredible healings, that all wrapped up with the first generation of Christians. But what if it didn't? What if we've got the timeline all mixed up? Okay, so our guide for this whole exploration is a book from way back in 1882. It's called The Ministry of Healing by A.J. Gordon. And he's writing in the late 19th century, and he makes this incredibly bold claim. He basically says, nope, you've all got it wrong. The age of miracles never actually ended at all. So how in the world does he argue that? All right, so Gordon kicks things off by basically flipping the whole script. He says, we've been asking the completely wrong question for centuries. It's not about when you live, it's about the kind of person you are. See, the standard view ties miracles to this very specific window of time, right? The apostolic age. But Gordon says, hold on, that's a huge mistake. He argues that miracles aren't connected to a certain era, they're connected to a certain type of person, what he calls apostolic men. These are people with this deep, unshakable faith, and it doesn't matter if they lived in the 1st century or the 19th. And this quote from him just nails it. He says, it is apostolic men that make an apostolic age, not a certain date of Anno Domini. I mean, think about that. He's saying the special ingredient for miracles isn't a date on a calendar. It's faith. Real, powerful faith. If that's there, he argues, then so is the potential for something truly miraculous. Now, this isn't just some abstract theory for Gordon. Not at all. He backs this up with a ton of historical stories, actual testimonies from all sorts of groups across the centuries, long after the apostles were gone. And he lays out this incredible list of groups, many of whom, by the way, were facing some serious persecution. We're talking about the Waldenses from the Middle Ages, the Huguenots in France, the Moravians, the Quakers, Baptists, Methodists, the list goes on. And he shows how, through the centuries, this one thread, reports of miraculous healings, connects all these really different communities. Let's just look at one of the earliest groups he brings up, the Waldenses. This is from their official confession of faith all the way back in 1431. They say, concerning this anointing of the sick, we hold it as an article of faith. So for them, this wasn't some weird fringe idea, it was a core belief. They thought miraculous healing was just as real for them as it was for the very first Christians. Okay, now fast forward a few hundred years. You have Count Zinzendorf, a leader of the Moravians, saying basically the same thing. He talks about having undeniable proofs of apostolic powers right there in his own community. And he gets specific, talking about healings from diseases that were considered total death sentences back then. But, of all the groups Gordon talks about, he saves his most dramatic stories for the Scottish Covenanters. This was a group whose faith was absolutely forged in the fire of some really intense conflict. See, Gordon's whole theory here is that it was precisely this bitterest persecution that created the perfect storm for this extraordinary, almost defiant kind of faith. He's kind of suggesting that when all your earthly hope is stripped away, something else, some other kind of power can show up. And that brings us to what might be the single most astonishing story in the entire book. It's about a Covenanter minister, a guy named John Welsh, and a young man who, after a long sickness, had, for all intents and purposes, died. What happened next is it's almost hard to wrap your head around. It was this incredible display of sheer persistence. The friends and family, they're all insisting, you have to bury the body, it's cold, it's dead. But Welch just refused. He prayed for 3 hours, then for 12 hours, then for an entire 48 hours. And even after 2 whole days, with everyone telling him it was over, he begged them for just 1 more hour. And according to the story, this was the result. The young man was restored to life. Now, Gordon uses this story to ask a really interesting question. He's basically saying, are we really that surprised by the miracle itself? Or should we be more surprised that a faith that stubborn, that unrelenting, could even exist in the first place? The book is just packed with other stories like this. Maybe not as dramatic as that one, but still pretty remarkable accounts of healing from all these different movements. Let's look at a couple more. Okay, so there's this story about Anne Mather. Her dad was a big-name Methodist commentator, and she'd been lame for over a year, couldn't take a single step. One day, they're just having a simple gathering for tea, and her father starts talking about God's power. The book says that right then and there, she conceived faith, and boom, right after they prayed, she just stood up and walked, completely healed. You can just imagine the shock in that room. And then you've got this wild account of a guy named John Scrimgeour. His daughter was on her deathbed, so he goes out into a field. And as the book puts it, he starts to expostulate with the Lord, which sounds like a very bold, almost argumentative kind of prayer. The story says he got an answer, basically saying, "Okay, I've heard you, but don't be this bold with me again." And when he got home, his daughter was totally fine. All right, so after laying out all this historical evidence from all these different times and places, the author brings it all together for his final, really powerful point. He looks right at the biggest objection he knows he's going to get from skeptics. The idea that, okay, these are nice stories, but they can't be real because they happened at the wrong time, long after the so-called apostolic age was supposed to be over. And his response to that is just, it's perfect. He basically says, sure, the age of miracles might be past, but only if the age of faith is past. For Gordon, you can't separate the two. They're totally linked. The real question has nothing to do with what year it is. And that's the big idea Gordon leaves us with. Is the age of miracles really past, or is it the age of faith that's past? By shifting the whole conversation from a period in history to a quality in people, he completely reframes the debate. Suddenly, it's not an argument about history books anymore. It becomes this really personal question about what we believe is possible right here, right now. And according to this old book, that's the difference between a closed chapter and a wide open possibility.